All right, I want to get started recognizing all your time. I'm sure we'll have some others join. Welcome all to the September edition of Member Matters. I'm Don Witruba, for those that don't know me. And I have to say, it's been a little while since we've done one back in August. And I did my first in-person county association meeting last week outside in a tent, so we were socially distanced. But I had to tell them, like, both for myself and I think for the rest of our staff, I get to a point where I miss interacting with board members, whether it be on the Zoom call or whether it be in person, particularly the in-person space, and hopefully we'll get back there someday. But, you know, I enjoy learning what you guys are doing in your districts so that I can share it with other board members and soups, as they call me, and give them contacts. Today we have, from a recognition standpoint and possible participation, we both have Brad Vanasek, our legal counsel, who you're all familiar with, and Jen Smith, our government relations director. So if we get into any spaces for them, they can answer questions. So I appreciate their being on. And I also, throughout the whole pandemic, as we've created different webinars, we have Stacy Bogard from our assistant director of communications and public relations helping manage this, and my appreciation to Stacy for making these all happen and sending out the notice to all of you for them. You know, a little update from an MASB perspective before we get into having you guys talk about what you're doing in your districts. We are 6 weeks away from annual conference. I believe now, Stacy, are we live for registration on our website?
It is up on the website, and an email will be going out shortly after this to direct you straight there.
All right, so, you know, encourage all of you to think about participating in the annual conference this year. Of course, if you remember, and I think something to share with all of your fellow board members and your superintendents, the conference is going to look very much like it always does. We have our main speakers, our keynote speakers. We're going to have our clinic sessions over the 2 days, over 4 different times. And all of this will be delivered to you free of charge. So for those that haven't attended in the past, or financially as a district this year, you worry about what your public will think or otherwise, that doesn't have to be a burden for you this year. And I would encourage you to, you know, for those that maybe you have attended, but other board members haven't, this is gonna be a great opportunity for them to experience everything that we put together in our conference. And for those that can't, hopefully within 2 or 3 weeks of the conference, all of the content from the conference will be available on MASB's website for people to download and watch. And so for a normal attendee at a conference, you go to 4 clinic sessions, and that's how much you get to see and learn. And sometimes you'll break it up with other board members. But every clinic session that we have will be available for anybody, and we'll keep them out there for quite some time. And so that will allow you, when you know, all of a sudden we have a presenter that's doing something on a bond issue, and today that's not an issue, but in 6 months, your superintendent says, hey, we need to start thinking about this. Likely we'll still have that clinic session out there for you to go and check out and learn a little bit about it. So I'm looking forward to the conference. It would be great if it was in person. It's not, but I still think we're going to deliver normal content. Just because it's free doesn't mean we're changing the quality of the conference. So hoping for good things coming out of that, and hoping for really good registrations. We are putting together time for networking. We know that you as board members like to interact with each other, much like we're doing on calls today. And we will have that as a part of the program in different ways to set you up so that you can interact, whether it be in regional groups, county groups, and, you know, like-minded, you know, information sessions. But there's going to be spaces for you to have that kind of casual interaction as close to what we can from a normal conference experience. So just know that's out there. Also, we have upcoming next month in October, our administrative assistants workshop. I don't know how many of you know that we offer that usually twice a year. We do workshops with administrative assistants that help the superintendent and help the board. You know, Brad does a big part of that to help them understand open meetings and freedom of information requests and all of that. So I would, you know, encourage you, if you have assistants that help you at the board level or help your superintendent that you know, of course, this will be virtual, encourage them to participate. I think it helps to keep boards in the right space from a violation perspective and keeps them up to speed on what they need to know in helping you manage that board meeting. The only other thing I will throw out there is just, you know, we're all back in school and we have a broad spectrum of being back in person, being back completely virtually, being back in some hybrid of the two. And I saw something, for those in West Michigan, you might have seen it too. I just talked about it in recording this week's podcast. One of the news stations covered, interviewed some teachers about how school has been going back and what their interactions have been. And it made me think, because of course, the headline was something along the lines of, you know, teacher says, you know, parent drinking at 11:45 in the morning or something like that. And it was, to me, like the headline, you know, that makes you want to look at it. That's what they do with headlines. But then of course you jump into the comment section, and what you ended up with there is watching community members and parents kind of blow up on the teachers because they viewed what the teachers were saying as criticisms. And, you know, it just made me think about, you know, we of course encourage that we're out there supporting our teachers and that we're out supporting parents. But just seeing that article, and, you know, it was a newscast, but they of course put it online as an article too. We're just in a place where I think we have to really, you know, have grace with each other. And so, you know, what's happening in a home, you know, normally you don't get to peer as a teacher into the home of our students. Sometimes it's probably good that you can, because maybe it helps in an intervention way. But we don't know the situations, just as the parents don't know the situations of the teachers and the struggles that they're all experience at, you know, coming into an online learning environment that they've never had. And, you know, I think I'm probably preaching to the choir. You're all in this public education space for a reason, but we just have to have grace with each other, like whether it be teacher to parent, parent to teacher. You know, public ed is in a space where, you know, how we do in this space during the course of this year and deliver education is likely going to dictate how we are viewed as public ed for years to come. And that's going to affect, do we need a ballot issue in the future to deal with school funding? Do we need to restructure taxes? Do we, at the local level, need to pass a bond issue? And all of these interactions are going to affect us in the long term. And so just keep it in mind. And as you're on social media, encourage that kind of space. And for those that you see, whether they be your staff or your friends, you know, I've done it a little bit. I don't get on Facebook much anymore because my mental health is more important to me than being on Facebook. But you know, I do, when I do get on there, you know, with my friends and family, I do correct them on occasion if I feel that their mindset is wrong, like just be a little bit nicer sort of space. And that may seem Pollyannish, but I think in our climate right now, if we're not doing that, we have some problems. So I want to spend today really hearing from you guys. I want you to be able to share with each other stories on reopening, things that you've learned from it that you're already making as changes, particularly for those districts that are on the call today that are temporarily virtual and have a date coming up for reopening, like what the thought in the community is, what the thought in the district is. Are you going to move down the road of reopening? We just had the district that neighbors our office here, Waverly Public Schools, was scheduled to open early in October. And interestingly, they sit on a border. So they are, as a district, largely in Eaton County, but they are serviced by Ingham County, and most of their kids come from Ingham County. And Eaton County's numbers are pretty low, and Ingham County's numbers are not, largely driven by East Lansing and MSU students. So the Waverly's had to postpone by another month their reopening just because their county numbers are high. And so I would be interested in hearing from those districts that are in the scope of looking at reopening, because that's what you scheduled another date that you were going to consider, to see what that's like. And for those that are reopened in person, I see some of you that are from up north, and so I know that you are. What that has been like? Have you had any COVID experiences? I did get in a conversation this morning, had a conversation about how different districts, even neighboring with each other, are approaching what they do when they have a COVID case differently, and there's a lot of inconsistency there. So I just want to have you guys share with each other. So I'll just take a first person to talk about what they are experiencing in reopening, whether it be virtual or in person or a hybrid. What's been good, what's been bad, and if you can do the raise your hand function, if you click on, let's see, if we click on participants, does that get us to a place of raising our hand? I think so. And if you can't do that, make sure your video's on. And I see Nick raise his hand first, so I'm gonna have Nick Rush let us know what their experience has been. And please, for those that are on, say what district you're from.
Yeah, so I'm from Northwest School District. We're in Jackson, Michigan. We're kind of a half hour to 45 minutes south of Lansing. We have, our students had the option to be in person or virtual. Our teachers are managing both of those. So even the kids that are in person are doing their work virtually through our learning platform, which is Schoology. I think the parents we have appreciated having the options. Our percentages right now, we have about 58% in person and 42% doing virtual, just so that people are aware of that. We gave them the option to switch every 4 weeks. We just went through that 4-week period, and our numbers went up slightly, but not like negligibly up to more in person. The thing I'm most concerned about is our teachers are completely overwhelmed. I'll be honest in that I am married to a teacher. I'm a parent of 2 kids doing virtual work at home by themselves during the day. And I'm on the board, and I'm still confused about certain things. So I know the teachers are overwhelmed. Don talked about giving grace. The thing I've been trying to do in my role is to show empathy and ask parents and teachers how I can help. I know there aren't a lot of tangible ways in my role I can. But I talked at our last board meeting about that, is I think the board needs to understand that parents can be confused, teachers are overworked, and we just really need to be empathetic towards our community as a whole.
That's a great point, Nick. And I do, I have teacher friends in our district too, and I have 2 kids in school, and some seem to be managing it really well, and others, based on maybe the kids that are in their classroom, based on their ability to pick up the learning. Maybe it's sometimes direction from the central office on how they're going to do things. There's lots of things. And if people have suggestions, I do think at the district level, that communication from the central office to teachers, I had somebody, well, in fact, one of our teachers of our children, we sent out an email thanking him for, the work and the communication. And he was worried about, I don't want to bother you. And I'm like, we both said, you can never communicate too much in this situation, whether that be from teacher to parent or from central office to teachers about what's going on. Because I think some of this is just, it's not purpose lack of transparency. It is the superintendent, the principal are going crazy also, and they just don't have the mindset to be communicating everything, and it's hard and the time. But I think the teaching staff will feel better with more information, and at least they feel that somebody's listening to them. So good point. I've heard from both teachers in that space too, and I think some are really struggling, and wherever central office can help that, they need to do that.
Yeah, I think the teachers are understanding that that central office and admins have needs they have to meet too, and I think in our district, people have been receptive to that. I think that I've been trying to reach out on social media to quell fears, when I see a parent that I know, I reach out directly to them, and I think anything we can do there is important. It is a weird space for the students, even when they go to school face-to-face, they're doing their work through the virtual platform. I think that's been an adjustment, but overall, I think we're managing and staying as positive as we can throughout it.
Good deal. I see Stephen Scoville has his hand up.
I'm Steve Scoville, the superintendent of Farwell area schools. We're currently about 80-20 on the in-person to virtual. We did offer 3 options, in-person, remote with our teachers, or 100% online through a third-party vendor, and that seems to be the lowest selected option of the 3. My teachers are also overwhelmed. They're working extremely hard. We, after our last board meeting last week, instituted a 2-hour early release every Friday to give teachers a chance to try to catch up on some of the remote learning that they're doing. That was received well by both parents and teachers. And so we've done our first one of those, and we will reevaluate each month to see if we're going to stay with that or what model of that. A couple of things, reading an article about a school that had shut down. I stole an idea from them. I don't know whose idea it was originally, but I thought it was brilliant. Cohorting at the high school level is very difficult. This school had cohorted the high school so that the seating charts were all alphabetical, so that the students each hour were generally around the same students, because each high schooler has a different schedule. So it improved the cohorting, even though they might be in different classes. I thought that was a good idea. I know health department consistency is something we've struggled with back and forth. District to my neighboring district struggles with communication with the health department and making sure that if somebody's supposed to be quarantined, that information gets shared to the school, and then the school needs to make sure they've got a process to share that with the people that know. Because on 2 different occasions, a student who was supposed to be quarantined was in the classroom for 1 to 3 hours, and that expanded the number of people that now need to be quarantined. So just some of the things we've picked up as we've gone along. We've seen our in-person learning increase. We started the first 2 weeks at the high school level with an AB cohort, where the first 2 days were purple and the second 2 days were gold. We will keep that plan in our back pocket. We're currently on week 4. If we have to go back, we would go back to that purple and gold cohorting to lower the numbers.
This is great. This is great sharing, and I see a couple people have made comments in chat too about, Steve just mentioned Friday early release. A couple have mentioned that they're actually doing fully virtual, even with in-person instruction on Wednesdays, just to give that day for both for teachers and I would assume even for those that are in person for cleaning the building. We see that in some of our hybrid models too. But this kind of sharing of ideas is exactly, I think, what is helpful and can be helpful for all of you. Adam, I see that your hand is up. I wasn't even going to try your last name.
Yeah, that's okay, Don. Thanks. Adam Stroyesky. I'm the president of the board in Beaverton, so Central Northern Michigan. I get called Adam Z all the time, so that's perfectly acceptable, and I've come very accustomed to responding to that. I spell my name all the time. I spell it to make it easier. So in Beaverton, for those, for a little bit of background, we're about 1,000 kid district, so fairly small. We're about 75-25% split for virtual versus in person. The 75% of students that have been attending in person, we've actually got very good feedback. We've received not only from veteran staff, but from fairly new staff and students and parents as well, that the preparation that was done that led up to day one has been as good as they've ever seen. I mean, I was approached by an old teacher of mine because I attended Beaverton and graduated from Beaverton as a student. When Mr. Mishler said to me, this has been one of the best years because of the deliberate, focused conversation about things that might not be specifically tied to the education, but how we logistically take care of things. It did help. And there was a lot of time, we tried to really engage a good cross section of staff community, parents, business owners as we were assembling our return to learn plans. So we met 3 or 4 times throughout the summer as that larger group. And then our administrators were just working tirelessly all summer, to get us to those plans so that we could be, nimble like all the rest of you guys had to be. One thing that we have been finding, because of our small size and our limited staff, we did ask that parents make the election of in-person or virtual and stick with that option for 1 semester. And because of the way that it worked out with highly qualified status and things like that, we are not able to offer our virtual students Beaverton educators, right? So we are third partying through Eduseer for that online platform. And we've been receiving some less than impressive feedback and results as it pertains to that system specifically. We did conduct 2 sessions with anybody that cared to attend yesterday, kind of a Q&A on the Eduseer platform. I haven't had a chance to circle around with our superintendent to see how those 2 sessions went yesterday, but we're continuing to understand and take a look at that. So, that's going okay, but of course not as good as, the face-to-face in-person learning with our staff. So we knew that going in. The one thing that I just kind of wanted to share and, maybe hear a little bit from everybody as well is, from a board perspective, we've been conducting, Zoom meetings, for our discussions. We did elect at our last board meeting, which would have been a week ago, to hold it outside. So we purchased a few of the large, we call them circus tents, right, for mask breaks and outdoor learning opportunities for various classes. And we conducted that outside yesterday, or our last meeting. Seemed to go very well. We were experiencing a bit of the contentious discussion that tends to happen on this online platform, right? It maybe makes it a little bit easier for folks that don't want to provide what I would consider constructive criticism. So it got very contentious in a couple of situations. And we decided that we would want to get back in that face-to-face. So Don, to your point, like it's that interaction with one another that we so much value. And, we're going to try, as long as it doesn't start snowing in October, to have our next board meeting face-to-face. And we did have good participation in person. It got a little chilly at the end, but working through that. And then the last thing I'll close with, and this is a question, and I always thank you, Brad, for your consultation last week as far as my Robert's Rules question went. We've been finding, through some of those contentious situations, the chat has been almost toxic to the point where when I'm running the meeting, I don't even look at it. People ask me about it after the meeting, and I say, I don't have time to look at that because it is the negativity that people will continue to spread. Has there been any discussion, because we afford the opportunity through a Zoom meeting to allow public comment? Normally, if I were running the meeting in a face-to-face situation and there was that type of chatter going on, I would slow the meeting down and I would ask that participants please respect the fact that we're trying to conduct a meeting. Has that come up in anybody else's district or Brad from a MASB perspective to, allow that to happen or not allow it to happen? Because, again, that was a very large factor in our decision to go back into the circus tent situation in lieu of continuing the Zoom meetings. So thank you.
I did see, Brad, that somebody posted that they disabled chat during their board meetings. It would seem to me, and I'll have you answer the question, that as long as they have a public comment period, they wouldn't be required to have the chat open during the meeting, but I could be wrong in that space.
No, that's correct. As long as you're offering public comment, there's no requirement under Executive Order 154 to have the chat available. It could be a rule relating to your public attendance, public participation as far as how you want to handle the chat. But if you just want to dismantle it during a public meeting, there's no issue with that. That wouldn't be a problem.
Okay.
That's
good to know.
I had never thought about that from a school board perspective. I mean, of course, we run these, and I've been on if you ever tune into one of the governor's or Facebook announcements when she does a press conference, I've minimized the chat because I don't want to read that stuff either. But I hadn't thought about it from a school board perspective, and I see a lot of them saying that they disable chat. Because I think I have heard from a number of boards that, of course, participation is in some ways much higher than it normally is, right? Because people can tune in from home. And, I've talked to some districts, even with some pretty contentious topics, where things have been managed pretty well. And so you're one of the early ones, and Brad might have heard more, but where like things have been, kind of ugly in that, not in the chat, but just in general. Because I know some that have, even though they've went back to in person, they're still sending it out via Zoom. So because they want that additional participation. And I'm guessing, Adam, in your case, when you guys went to in person in the tent, you were no longer holding that electronically. You were all in person.
Yeah, correct. And, there's more to the story, just like there always is. There were some internal issues that didn't help the situation. I'll leave it at that without going into gory detail, we were able to minimize and kind of bring, a little bit more of a calming effect with the in-person strategy. So, that was something that we elected to do as a board, and it seemed like it was better. We did get a lot done via Zoom, right? I mean, we made some difficult decisions. We privatized our busing, through the course of this. I mean, I conducted that meeting in Cody, Wyoming while we were visiting my brother out there. So, there are some definite benefits to it, but I think, just interesting to hear how folks are taking it. And that's that chat thing that I would consider going back to it if I could turn that off, because I keep hearing things about it, and it was some of it. And again, it's the same reason, Don, that you limit your Facebook interaction. I don't have a Facebook account because, I've been on the board for 15 years. And, when it started, it was just a platform for people to not necessarily say things they would say face-to-face, positively, politely, and professionally. And, frankly, we got to focus on that center 80% of logical people. And sometimes the outliers cause us to get our grease guns out because they're the squeakiest wheel. But, as elected officials, we got to try to focus on the majority too. So it's just always a unique dynamic. So,
Eric John, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I am with Kennewick Hills Public Schools, which is in Kent County, just outside of Grand Rapids. And we're doing a return to learn plan that includes about 75% of our students chose the in-person option, about a quarter chose the online option. We do have our educators that are monitoring through that system. So we also have a third-party contractor, but we have Kennewick Hills teachers that are available specifically for students in those programs. So one that talked to us at our last board meeting, she is responsible to oversee about 60 fifth graders, which is incredible to me because that's an insane amount. But she says it's pretty manageable with the fact that they can log in anytime. She's not doing anything synchronous, but during school hours, she's able to field phone calls, and she has set office hours where she'll send kids a Zoom link, and a few kids will pop on every 10 minutes or so to ask questions about their learning. Something related to the school board meeting. So we're in person now for our most recent one, and we will be in person for our next school board meeting, of course, with masks and everything and distance. But I also, we recognize the importance of letting people still have that option. And those 25% of families that chose to be online, they shouldn't be denied the availability to access us as a school.
Oop, you froze. Unless I'm the only one seeing him as frozen.
He is frozen, and we lost him on video.
Okay. We will come back to Eric John. Nick, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so in Rockford, we're neighbors to Eric John. We're in northeast Kent County. We have about 8,000 students, and 1,000 or 13% of them chose virtual. The interesting thing about that is, for those of you that don't know, we're kind of just at a MASH U.S. representative territory. So very, very conservative, very very open with their thoughts like that. And so most of our community was pretty much hell-bent on being in class, and the board, I would say, was 100% there. And literally 4 days before we were supposed to open, we flipped to the first 3 weeks being remote for everybody. Our families have two options. We're on a trimester here, so someone else mentioned they're committing to being remote. For us, they're committing to being virtual for 9 weeks for the whole trimester. And then about 3 or 4 weeks before that, we'll open it up again for them to decide. Some of the interesting things that I heard earlier, I'll just build on. For our virtual, one of the options we gave some of the teachers who were, shall we say, some were terrified out of their mind to come back, is they could, take a leave of absence for a year. They could retire, they could quit. But a fourth option was they could raise their hand and say, I'll help with the virtual crowd. So we have two curriculums, third party, one for elementary and one for secondary. We have now about 26 staff that manage those 1,000 people. With all the reporting and stuff like that, we actually moved an assistant principal to basically what is now our second largest school. Our high school is about 3,000 students. So for virtual, we moved about 26 staff who either volunteered or were chosen to sort of manage those 1,000 plus students. So really helpful for the touch points, the requirements that the state has and things like that. Plus, we're all board members. We know we're going to ask for details. So now we have someone shepherding that whole process, and it happened to be someone who worked on the committee. Our second option for parents was in class. And again, for our first 3 weeks, everybody was remote. I think the stress level in the buildings went way down when the students came back, because most teachers that were really fearful, and most parents who were fearful, we put the stake in the ground. September 14th, we were going to be back in the buildings. We essentially made 100% of the people unhappy when we made the decision so close to start day. But in fact, hindsight, it looks like it was a really good move on our part. But I will say that 2 days before classes were supposed to start, we had 300 people in the virtual class, and in less than a week, we had 1,000. So we did have to do some movement there, but I took some notes, and I think those were the most important aspects, the nuances. We did not consider hybrid because, again, our secondary buildings are quite large. Our middle schools are 800 and over 1,000. Our high school is about 3. So even if we had half the kids in a large regular class like English 11 or something, being in a hybrid model and having only half the students in there would provide us really zero benefit. So it was also easier for our parents to, ask for another 3 weeks to work remote if they were supposed to be back in their buildings, parents working. So those are the things that we did. Now, we could afford to move an assistant principal over this virtual school, if you will. But it was for accountability. I think we just had to do that, and mainly to make sure that we were on task with the state, and then of course making sure that we could get our questions answered and make sure that we were holding people accountable. But so far, so good.
Thanks for that, Nick. One thing that I'll comment on in that space. We recorded this week's podcast that'll come out later this week, and David Hecker, the president of AFT Michigan, is the guest on it. And I talked to him about like he speaks for AFT, not MEA, but it's similar dynamic, right? And I asked him what do his members want in reopening? Because we saw school districts that were planning on reopening, had pressure from the unions and didn't. And of course that puts parents in a bad space, at least for some of them. And one of the things that he brought up, safety of course is his main concern. And just like all of you and all of your superintendents, their teachers would rather be back in person too. But he did say on the issue that you brought up, Nick, is that, for those teachers that have, particularly if they have underlying conditions, not just because they're afraid, but just because they have, whether they do or a spouse or a kid or somebody else at home does. And, he's like, we've had some districts that they're going back no matter what. And that's the district, that's where they landed. And he said, we've got other districts that are trying to accommodate and find that, they're teaching, if they're doing a virtual option, they're able to teach as a teacher from their district virtually, or in your case, helping manage the online environment or whatever it might be. And, I do think sometimes just having those conversations, I think our adversarial relationship at the bargaining table, and it's happened this year, and I would lay it at the feet at many times with the unions, but I also understand just having being able to have a conversation that isn't heated. And that's why when I approached David about doing the podcast, I said, it might be better for him and I to have a conversation about labor issues than our members having it at the table, because that's just never, it doesn't always work out. And so I do think for those that are on today, like, if the thing that's keeping you from opening is that big pushback from your teachers, if there's that middle ground where you can find a space for those teachers that are uncomfortable where they could still teach virtual, or, maybe it is a leave if they have to take a leave, like, I think finding those options might be a good place to try to get back to it in an open space.
Yeah. Well, I would give this context too. In Rockford, again, we don't know the percentages, but the majority of our teachers are not active in the union. But we do treat our teaching staff like family, and we've been pretty good about that. I mean, there hasn't been a job action, formally. The union even stepped in. There was, obvious Facebook campaign at the last minute to have us go remote. And I would say we got contacted. I had over 300 emails from community and teachers. I've never had more than 4, and that was over, our football coach retiring after 30 years last year. So I went from 4 as my high level watermark to about 320 something. But I would say that our union even stepped in when teachers were contacting the board members directly from a Facebook campaign, and they said, we collectively bargain. We don't bargain through Facebook and individual email. So they stepped in and kind of quashed that. Now, we didn't drop the hammer on anybody. It was, I responded to every one of those emails, but I will say that we've had support from our union. The ironic part is once we announced the first 3 weeks were remote, we actually had more teachers retire because they couldn't fathom doing any more remote. So that was the sort of the 100%, 180 degrees different than what I thought would happen, but it was pretty ironic. But so far so good. We've had some COVID cases and things like that. We're getting pressure about having an individual dashboard. Our ISD here in Kent County has been a little slow to put something out. And so the Facebook event happening today is I'm getting more emails today about Rockford creating our own dashboard because we just communicate with those schools as we should and those parents. And so some parents are talking and others. So now it's like there's all these rumors. But the fact of the matter is we'll probably end up having to do a dashboard, what we're allowed to do anyway. So I'm not sure what's going to happen. It's all in flux. We waited, I think, as long as we can for the ISD. But we have about 8,000 students, 13 buildings. So, we're bound to get COVID and we have it, but it's not serious. But, you know, we've had some parents just totally ignore the send kids with a COVID case in their house to school, and suddenly we have to, you know, quarantine a room, but that's only happened once. So that's how it started here in Rockford. So far, so good, I would say.
Good. Ken, you've had your hand up.
Thank you, Don. Just to piggyback on what everyone else has said, we also have gone in person. That was always an option from day one. We do have what we call the Brighton Virtual Academy. And I'll mimic what Nick was just talking about. We've had a lot of, we had promised a lot of things in our Virtual Academy. Support from the teachers, our curriculum being brought in, and we offered those positions to those that wanted to stay in a virtual area. And in the middle of all of it, and just before we pulled the switch on it, the union stepped in and said, no, you know, we're not going to let them go there. And they basically told the staff, you know, you need to back out of that. So it put us in a precarious position. Our interim superintendent, who used to be our curriculum director, thank goodness, could pull into her basket of retired teachers and get that going. But it's been a slow start now as a result of that, and a lot of contention with the union. I'm sure some of you have heard some of that, but it brings me to a question. I actually was on the phone with our interim superintendent on the way here, and she said she's going to call Brad. And I said, no, don't bother. I think I'm going to be seeing him in a few minutes. Our question would be, we anticipate a long drawn out meeting tomorrow night because of some of the negative things going on our virtual academy. And we've had a few 2 o'clock in the morning or later meetings, and because it kind of gets you on this virtual meeting world. They can bring as many people as they want. As long as they just keep talking, you're kind of stuck there. Can we limit in any way the amount of participation that we will accept on any meeting night? Or can we somehow make it that they must email their information, and then we can read them? And many times we'll be able to sift through and find duplicates and say we have another one regarding this issue, we'll move on. Something to try and get us home before 3 in the morning.
Yeah, good question, Ken. So on the first one, you can't limit the number of individuals who are going to address the board during public comment. One thought would be possibly recessing the meeting. I know some boards will do that. If you have a large amount of individuals wishing to address the board, you could recess that up to 36 hours. If you get to be around 11 o'clock, you could recess it till the next day at 7, and that would not be an issue. I know some boards have gone through the procedure of having individuals submit their comments in writing as part of public comment. There is some language in Executive Order 154 that I think arguably permits that, but what I advise to those districts, if you still have an individual that is adamant about addressing the board during real time during the meeting, does not wish to submit a written comment, I would say that person should address the board in real time. But certainly having folks submit written comments in advance is kind of a good accommodation. But I think it's one of those where it's highly recommended or urged, to do that. I'm not sure if you can say that is your only opportunity for public comment. Again, Executive Order 154 could be interpreted to mean that, but it's new. We don't have any precedent on that. So I would say allow for an exception to have someone address the board in real time if they wanted to do so.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
It may reduce your total number of people if at least they can get on the record. That might be all they want, and then saves them from taking up your time and comment. Steve, I see you had your hand back up.
Reference to an employee that had a medical issue that really put them at risk if they were to teach in person, but where they live has very bad internet connection, and we're not able to do it remotely. We have a coach's office off of our gymnasium that during the day there's nobody back there. They're able to come in a back door, and so they teach remotely from the coach's office. And then we have a parapro or a sub covering the room so that it's a higher level math class. We couldn't find a sub capable or qualified to teach that higher level math. So the teacher's doing the remote instruction on site, but never comes in contact with any of the students or people. There's a bathroom back there, so they never have to come out into the general public, but they're able to deliver the content and do it remotely from on site.
Thanks, Steve. I do think that that's the, and I understand, and David and I were polite to each other during our podcast, but, I do think the unions in some districts have, really pushed it to a bad space, which I think is going to reflect poorly on public ed. But I think, pre-existing positive relationships probably puts you in a good place, like Nick mentioned, where the union's actually checking their own members because they don't want them to go in a certain direction. And even what Steve just gave as an example, like other teachers knowing that you're making an accommodation for somebody, it builds goodwill. I mean, even if they aren't one of those people being accommodated because they don't need to, those are the things that, can really help and enable things to move forward maybe faster than they would have otherwise. We have about 10, 12 minutes left. I'd be interested for any district that is coming close to their deadline, that they're currently virtual, that is coming up close to their deadline to be back in person and without sharing things that you're not supposed to share. What's that looking like for you? What are the things that you're considering in reopening? Is it your countywide numbers or anything along those lines? So anybody that's in that space that's coming up on their deadline to go back in a face-to-face environment that is not there yet. Might not be. I'm not seeing any hands jump up on that one. Oh, yes, Bridget.
Good afternoon. It's nice to see everyone on Zoom and to talk about this. I always learn so much from you all in comparing our notes. We started back remotely, much to my dismay. We had originally offered 2 plans, of course, the standard in-person and also online. We have about 7,500 students. Of that, 1,500 were supposed to go online. So it was pretty clear where the line stood. Out of extreme due diligence, our new superintendent really opted to and encouraged us to go remote for safety concerns. So we've been there. And I can tell you, and it's nothing new. You guys all know this. It's been stressful. It's been stressful on the teachers. It's been stressful on the parents. It's been stressful on the students. Heck, it's stressful on the board. We're caught in the middle of this and there's no play game and we're all learning as we go. And we're trying our absolute best to continue to provide an excellent education, but it's become really difficult. So last week we held a meeting. It was off for us because our new soup had scheduled a session with our search firm for a bit of an orientation to get a little bit more continuity with our communications and whatnot. So we held a meeting and then a special meeting to go over that class together. And in our meeting last week, he announced that this week, our normal week for a regular board meeting, he would be revealing a plan to get what he's calling our early learners back sooner. Originally, the face-to-face was going back at the second quarter, which for us is November 9th. So as he moves into that realm, right now, ironically, my email's quiet because people are anticipating this, and I'm listening to all of you tell me how it's going, and it's giving me a lot of good thought and questions moving forward. It is very contentious. I will tell you, the addition of stress for me is that I'm also up for re-election. And we have 4 seats open and 9 people running. And so it's been an incredible balancing act for me that I hope I'm doing well in, because it's stressful. A medical doctor, I think he's a psychiatrist, put on something out on Facebook the other day that said mental hygiene needs to become as common as hand washing is for us. And I couldn't agree with that more, right? Because we're all over all this PPE and wash your hands and do this. And yet I really am sensing with people the stress, the mentality, and it's everyone. There's no one sector that's probably greater than the other. And to me, in all of this, in all honesty, that's my greatest concern. So in all of this, what you all are doing with this, if you have any other insights in the future, maybe we can talk about that some more, because I know there's all kinds of platforms for that and ways to do it. But the reality of making it happen, especially remotely or in a virtual line, that's just right there with me and my concerns. Thanks.
Thank you for that. And that is a possibly good suggestion. I think the mental health aspect, I know we're hearing it at the district level about our kids, but I think there's a teacher aspect of that. There's your superintendents themselves and how they are doing. I know many of them might have, normally summer would have been a time to get a little time away from school for superintendents. Most of them did not get that time away. So I do think that piece is there and a worthy conversation. You mentioned the early learners piece, and that was one of the things. We've had one conversation with the state superintendent about it, and David and I touched on it in the podcast today. For those districts that are having that, uncomfortableness going back, and unwillingness from the teachers to go back or whatever it might be, one of the things that at least is hanging out there that some districts are doing, in fact, is even if you can't bring all of your students back, there is conversations about, okay, our first step. Can we bring our special education population back? The teachers in that situation tend to have a pretty special bond with their students. They went into special education teaching for a reason. Clearly, for many of their students, they are going to come closer than 6 feet, and there's no way to stop that for the higher needs kids. But they tend to be a teacher population that is maybe more willing to have that risk because of their love for those kids, and not that every teacher doesn't love their kids, but clearly I think it's different. And then also school districts talking about kind of kindergarten, first grade, those kids that yet are trying to learn literacy skills and are least likely to be able to do well in an online environment unless they have a parent constantly monitoring and engaging with them. And so that's another place that I'm hearing from some districts where they're starting to schedule and trying to figure out, can we bring certain more vulnerable populations back into the buildings? I live in Grand Ledge, and so we're trimester, so our decision isn't until December whether there's going to be a change, and that's a long period of time. And so I do know that school at least is looking at different options about what might be done for other populations short of the full student population. So that's another piece of flexibility I think that could be out there. That if you're, I'm a parent of a 5th grader, and he's, I'm home some days and I'm in the office some days, but he's generally able to manage. He's only cried like 3 times in 2 weeks, so it's one of those situations though he can manage it. If he was in 1st grade or 2nd grade, like my wife or I would have to be there in that space. And so I think from a parent perspective, if you can address some of that population that is the hardest, that needs the most supervision, you move in a direction that puts your parents in a place to be supportive of, even if older kids might still remain virtual, it becomes a middle ground, I think, to reach sort of thing in that space. We've got a few minutes left. Any other comments, ideas? Pam, I see you just raise your hand.
Yes, Pam from Traverse City Area Public Schools. Just wanted to say a couple of things. We went back yesterday in person after being 9 days virtual. And to tell you the truth, there have been some real positives in doing that. We do have about 13% that are virtual right now. But in talking to a number of our teachers over the last week or so, we visited a number of buildings. And one of the ideas that kept popping up was the idea that our kindergarten teachers really liked what was happening virtually. And they said it had some really great positives. One was that they were getting to know their students in a very different but still personal way. They felt like their students wouldn't be nearly so afraid to come to school because they were getting to know them. And the second thing was that the parents were able to learn and see what was going on, understand some of the language, some of the words that they were using. And they saw so many positives in it that they are thinking about doing it again next year. So there are some positive things that have come out of this situation. As I said, we started back face-to-face yesterday, and I haven't heard anything. So I'm assuming that no news is good news at this point. Thank you.
Thanks for those comments, Pam. I absolutely, I've talked to enough board members and superintendents over the last couple of months. We all knew that from an education standpoint, technology was going to have to become a greater part of our classroom, because the kids that are coming up that are first graders right now, you may all be better parents than I am, but my kids received a cell phone at a restaurant pretty early to be able to watch PBS Kids or something to occupy their time. And I think that's fairly common. And these are kids that are coming up through our schools, and they're going to be in that space. And many superintendents are saying, we had a long-term plan to move, technology into the classroom more and more. And this has really sped up that process. And I think to a person, they all say, for the betterment of our kids, not in the current year when it's like being forced down like it is, but the teaching staff that are teaching for you virtually right now are learning skills that they will be able to transmit into the classroom a year from now, and 2 years from now, and 3 years from now, even when we're back in person. And the outcomes of that, I think, are only going to be positive for us delivering education as our society becomes more individually driven, like I want education for me kind of space. Being able to be adapt and be able to approach our kids in a more as needed basis will be beneficial. And I think one of the things that we're going to have to be ready for a year from now is we're going to be back in school. Hopefully we'll be back in school in person, like, as normal. We've gotten a handle on COVID, and so that's not our fear. I'm going to expect you will have parents that ask you, hey, my kid really flourished last year in an online environment. Can we continue that? And I think that's going to be one of the next big things post-COVID that schools will have to deal with, is once you've done this, how do you address those parents that find this experience useful? Because we know there are online and virtual academies that are out there and have been out there for years. And we know that there are your neighboring public schools that will likely somehow keep it going if they don't already offer it. And so districts will have to face that question. Do we continue to offer some form of virtual education once the pandemic has passed us by? Or do we risk losing those parents that want to keep it as an option because they're going to go to someplace else to get that option? Probably not one, we deal with it because of our virtual academies in Michigan, but I think exposing parents to this is going to make some of them say, my kid did well in this space, like they, for different reasons. And so that's a space that I think we'll all have to deal with. We are right at 1 o'clock. I don't want to keep you all longer than necessary. I know some of you do this on lunch breaks from work. I just want to extend a thank you for participation. We will continue these at least on a monthly basis and as needed in between. I think you heard it from your colleagues on here, you guys sharing with each other what you're doing, how you're addressing problems is just a helpful process. And just appreciate you sharing like you are, and make sure that if you have questions coming up, always can send them to me. If you have questions for Brad, for Jen, make sure that you pass that along, and we will get you answers as quickly as we can. We definitely don't have to wait for in between webinars to answer questions for you. So thank you all for participating, and have a great rest of your week, and best of luck in all of the decisions that you guys have to make over the next couple of weeks and next couple of months.